Welcome to the What's Your Ceiling podcast. We're your hosts, Monte, Wyatt, and Paul Scieszinski. Wherever you are in life, there is a higher ceiling. This podcast is how you become aware of it and how to take action to push through it. It's time to discover your ceiling. Welcome to the What's Your Ceiling podcast. I'm Monte Wyatt.
I'm Paul Scieszinski.
And we want to welcome you, our achiever, to our next show. We're here to talk about your health, your family, your business, and we've got a great guest today. But before we get into our guest, Paul's got a great announcement of a cool activity that we're going to be doing here in a couple weeks.
Yes, we do, Monte. We're excited. We have the opportunity to be at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting on May 5th, the day before. We're also going to participate in the meeting on May 6th in Omaha. We have on May 5th, we're going to be doing our podcast, and we're going to be doing it downtown at the hotel. So you'll be able to see us there. We're also going to have a meetup. So the achievers out there, people that want to meet up, we'll be sending some information out on that on our next podcast.
We'll have a banner there so you can see us. And
you'll see a banner there. Also, we have an email if you want to email us. It's wycmediapod@gmail.com. wycmediapod@gmail.com. And we're looking forward to have a great event. So everybody out there that's listening to this and want to come and join us, meet us, we will be at the Berkshire Hathaway meeting Friday, May 5th, and the meeting is May 6th. But we're looking forward to that. Come and join us.
Thank you for that, Paul. It's going to be a fun event. It's going to be a lot of good, interesting interviews that we're going to have with some great guests there. But let's talk about today's guest. And very good, experienced businessman. And I'm going to have Paul introduce our guest for today.
Oh, we have a guest here today. I'm fortunate to have here. I would call a friend. This gentleman here, he is a big piece of why casinos are in the state of Iowa. And not only is he's one of the first guys that started casinos in Iowa, he was also part of when we did business back in the day. He's also started casino boxing. He's going to talk about where he started in the casino business, his position and what he's done and what he's built with 3 different casinos in the state of Iowa. The largest casino in the state of Iowa. And it's an amazing thing that he's built. He's a family man. He's a businessman. And we get back to what he really is. He's the brains behind the brains. And, we think about that, Monte, and what comes to you when you think about the guy that's the brains behind the brains?
When I think of brains behind the brains, it's bringing an expert in. It's having someone help you see things that you can't see, to challenge you, that someone that you trust to help you see what needs to be done. That's a brains behind the brains in my mind.
Absolutely. And everybody knows there's an entrepreneur out there that's out there knocking the weeds down. But to keep and maintain that business, it takes the brains behind the brains. And that's what we have here today. And people don't realize, like an Elon Musk, there's brilliant people he surrounds himself with to keep that business moving forward. Well, we have that guy that's behind the curtain that came and built these businesses, and he was the brains behind the brains.
Tom Timmons, welcome to the show.
I'm looking around. Is this me? You're talking about me?
To get us started, like I said, we always have a theme, and today's theme is brains behind the brains. Just give us a little insight. When you hear that phrase, what comes to mind for you?
Well, it's not myself. I've never looked at myself that way. I've always just taken on challenges, get to know my business, whatever I'm doing. I don't know if any of you ever heard of a guy by the name of Chuck Offenberger. He's called the Iowa Boy. And I always use this story. I worked with Chuck very closely to get the last casino license ever given in Iowa. It was Jefferson, Iowa. Chuck lives in Jefferson, Iowa. Got to be very good friends with Chuck. But every time we'd go around and make a speech together, Chuck would say, he's the Iowa Boy. And I always say, yes, but I'm the Iowa Boy that got into gaming. So that's how we identify each other. So I answer your original question. I don't know how to react to that statement of brains behind brains. But whatever needs to be done, I always tried to figure out best position for people, put them in that best position to get that done. And accomplish a goal. You have to have small goals along the way, and then you have to have an overall goal of where you're heading. and you got to keep score somehow to know when you're there.
And building that team. I mean, you built teams, and
absolutely.
I mean, and Tom he's known for his numbers. He's an analytical guy, and when he shows up, you better be ready because the numbers tell the truth. And if you know how to put the numbers together, it's going to tell the truth. And Tom, would you talk a little bit about your casino background? And I know it was almost kind of wasn't exactly planned, but you ended up getting a casino box or casino business. Tell us a little bit how you ended up in that and how you started in the casino.
The Reader's Digest version, because this podcast I think is long enough. When I'm taking you back. I stopped to figure up the other day, Paul. Do you know I did casinos in 5 different decades? I started in 1989, albeit, but it was a decade.
Yes.
And then just recently retired in 2022. So if you start adding that up, it's 30 some years in doing casinos and gaming in Iowa.
Well, Tom, I can't say you look good for 102.
Well, thank you. I wish I felt that good, but no, I look. There's probably nobody with any more Iowa gaming experience than me. When I started Prairie Meadows, started with horse racing. Then we added slot machines at Prairie Meadows. I left Prairie Meadows and went to work at Osceola Casino, Lakeside Casino. That was my first exposure to table games and slot machines. Left Osceola in about 2004 and became what was called the executive director of Greyhound Racing. That's the dogs that run in the state. So I got my exposure to not only now horse racing, dog racing. Got to know those folks and worked with them. Then when I left that position, I ended up working for a gentleman by the name of Bill Krause for a brief period of time, who had started the touch play industry in Iowa, if you remember back to that. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother story. We could do what happened, albeit it was short-lived, lasted about 6 months, but I would go into Bill's come and go places, and Matt Manning and myself. Matt now owns
and Bill Krause was the owner of Come and Go. It's a C-store here in the state of Iowa, I think all over the Midwest. Yeah. But he was a prominent businessman in the state of Iowa and the Midwest, and so you worked for him.
I worked
and
for
putting
him.
Slots in these.
Well,
tried to.
They looked like a slot machine. They smelled like one, but they weren't. And that's a whole different story. But Matt and I would go into the Come and Goes, and Bill would go with us once in a while. And we would take out some freezers, whatever, that were in a corner and make little mini casinos, if you will. We could have up to 4 machines in a spot like that. And the 2 busiest spots at that time, albeit, like I said, it only lasted about 6 months, but the 2 busiest spots in Iowa are on the east side of Des Moines on Easton Boulevard. Those were the 2 best stores. Not giving any secrets away because it doesn't
right by Prairie Meadows.
And you'd pull into the parking lot, there would be nobody parked there. And you'd say, what's going on? There would be people lined up to get into those because we took it to the neighborhoods. That's what it was.
Right.
The easier you make it, the more people will come, as they say. So, I worked with the short story on Bill, though. I learned a lot from him, and he was a good friend. God rest his soul. But I remember Matt and I one time were looking at where to put a mini casino, if you will, one of the Come and Goes, and I thought Bill was standing right behind me, and so did Matt. We started saying something to Bill and didn't answer. And we turned around, and there was Bill up at the front counter. And he was moving stuff from one place to the other. I went up there and said, Bill, what are you doing? And he says, oh, Tommy, it's all about presentation. Impulse buy and presentation. You got to have this the right way. I don't know who set this store up, but they didn't do it the right way. There he was setting up the store. But then to continue the story, did touch play. Then I got involved in Wild Rose Casino and did that for about 16 years and just recently retired at the end of the year.
Tom, you've worked with a lot of amazing people. I mean, you really have. Yeah. And you well know, there's a lot of business people out there, they track talent. And, you started out with Prairie Meadows, and you actually started out in the horse racing business. And tell us a little bit of how you got into the horse racing business, how you transferred it. Because if you don't know, Prairie Meadows Racetrack Casino is one of the most beautiful racetracks in the United States. It became a county-owned, one of two.
Yeah.
And I think it was the first, but we'll let Tom tell that story. But tell us a little bit about how you transitioned into the racetrack, to the casino, to the next level. Well, and it just didn't happen.
It didn't. I will go back to one comment you said, though, Paul, it's spot on. I've told this to many people that have worked with me, for me through the years. If you want to understand any business, get to know the numbers. The numbers is what can really lead you to a lot of things as things come up, and I agree with that. But to answer your original question, how did I get involved in gaming? Well, when Prairie Meadows was being built, they had a job fair, and I thought, I want to work there. So I went out and applied. I applied for an accounting position, as I recall. I'm taking you back now a long time. and I got turned down. I didn't make the cut, as they say. So fate would have it, I ended up getting a job at the time at the Polk County Auditor's Office and working in their accounting division, and worked there from 1986 until the fall of 89. But essentially it was almost the summer of 89, because at that point Prairie Meadows had opened up March 1, had their first horse race, March 1, 1989. And about 30 days into the meet, I'm going to say it was sometime in the month of May, the powers to be at Prairie Meadows went to the county supervisors and said, we're out of money. We've gone through everything.
And then how many days did that take?
It's probably 2 months' time. I think it was all of March, all of April, maybe half of May, but it wasn't very many days of racing. And they call horse racing the sport of kings. Iowa just didn't have enough kings.
I suppose.
It's pari-mutuel is a whole different game than casino gaming. I could give a class on that. Monte, you would probably like that.
Yeah.
But it is a different game. And, pari-mutuel, you don't really lose money because in the gaming itself, because you take money right off the top of every pool. It's a pool of wagers. It's a French word. Pari-mutuel is a French word. It means amongst ourselves. So you have all these pools. Each wager has its own pool, whether it's win, play, show, exactive, quinella, name it. All has its own pool. Money goes in. House takes their money right off the top, approximately anywhere from 15 to 24%. And then the rest gets returned to the winning tickets. That's how it works in pari-mutuel. Well, the problem is once you take that 20% out and the pools aren't that big, that 80% doesn't leave much when you got to pay for the light bill and haul the manure away of the horses and not to mention return to the bettors. So, they ran into some issues right away. And I was working at Polk County, as I said, Polk County Auditor's Office. Got to know the Polk County Controller at the time. His name was Jim Koloff. Became very good friends with Jim. And Jim didn't have time to spend to look over their finances because they had gotten rid of the top management at the time and their CFO. And the county was kind of assuming the finances at that point. And he came to me and he said, would you be able to go out there and look over the finances and report to me and tell me what's going on? And I said, well, you'd have to clear it through my boss, who I worked for the auditor at the time, a guy by the name of Tom Parkins at that time. Anyway, they worked it out and I went out there, I believe it was in June. And the harness racing had just started to race there at that time in June of 89, which no longer even races there anymore. So I was exposed to that as well. But one thing led to another. Got to know the GM at that time, a lady by the name of Carol Baumgarten. Used to coach Drake basketball and ran the YW, I believe, CA for a while. And became very good friends with her and learned a lot from her. Credit a lot of my career to her. She gave me that opportunity, and she was the one that wanted me to stay, get off the county payroll and go to work for them. And it sounded like a great deal, except Prairie Meadows had filed for bankruptcy at that same time. Mm-hmm. So it was quite a decision to make. I'd had 3 kids at home and 3 little kids, and a lot of soul searching, but it was something that told me that this is what I wanted to do, so when am I ever going to get the opportunity to do it? And to come in at that level as the chief financial officer. Now, you don't really like to put that on your monikers, Monte, as you know, chief financial officer of a bankrupt company. But
so you're coming in, you're actually coming in during the bankruptcy.
Right. I came in just prior to. I actually came in at the end of '89. Bankruptcy wasn't filed until 1991.
Okay.
About 2 years later.
But you saw where it was going.
We did the best we could. We still had to get money from Polk County to pay for things because there's so many mandates of how you have to run live racing. Or again, another class of what all goes on and what you're mandated to do, because you take wagers on it, so it's highly regulated. But as fate would have it, filed bankruptcy at the end of 1991. Carol decided she wasn't going to be a part of that, and she says, "I have to leave." And I said, "Well, what does that mean for me?" And she said, "Well, congratulations, I think you're the new GM." Well, it isn't like somebody was going to go apply for the position or come in. And so in one of them deals, you're standing in line and say, "All volunteers step forward," and everybody takes a step back except you. That was me. So
You got to take the bullets.
Yeah, so we had about 50 people at the time. I called them the Nifty 50. We became very tight. Because everyone was against us, it seemed like, at the time, because there was a lot of articles, because it was tied to government, and government made a bad investment in a lot of people's minds. $60 million was tied up on the bonds to pay for Prairie Meadows. It was guaranteed by Polk County. And so the paper, you got so you hated to pick the paper up and read it at the time, or even watch the news, because it was tied so closely to the politics of everything. But those 50 people kept it open during that bankruptcy. But the bad news is, during that time, we had to survive on what we generated. So we suspended live racing in 1992, and we just simulcast, which they still simulcast today. That means showing races from another track, and you take bets on them. So we did that for the whole year of 1992. Until the end of 1992, there was a guy by the name of Mick Lura, who was the head of the Iowa Racing Gaming Commission at the time. He came in and had a meeting with me, and he said, well, the gig's up. He said, you can't just keep simulcasting anymore. If you want to keep your gaming license, you have to live race. I mean, that's... Lee Trevino said one time, he said, do you consider this golfing, this pro golf thing, pressure? And he says, pressure? He says, pressure is when you got to make a downhill birdie putt for, it's 10 foot long, and for $10 and you got 5 in your pocket. That's pressure. and that's what I felt like. I honestly felt like that, what are we going to do? But somehow we put a live meet together. The purses were $1,000 per race. Today they're in excess of 20, I think 25, something like that. That's how far it's coming.
Now, I want to ask a question. We've got our achievers, we've got business owners, we've got entrepreneurs that listen to us. Mentally, how do you work through that, and how do you manage that, and what was your focus to get through that? Because that's a big pressure. You're talking $60+ million, and
Yep.
You've got
everybody against you.
Everybody against you.
The thing that Carol Baumgarten taught me is no is not an option. When somebody tells you no, and you've got in your head that I can make this work, and you don't look at the negatives and let that outside noise affect you. You hear that a lot in sports, but it applies to day as well. Because if you listen to other people, and back then we were probably at the beginning of internet, so I don't know how that would have affected things, because it affects things today. But that I keep using the reference to the paper and the news or the TV, because that's where everybody got their news. And so had we had the internet back then, but that's what it was, Monte. I just didn't let it get to me.
I love how you said that no is not an option. You got to find a way. And I'd love to hear some of your creativity, how you worked through that, how you found a way, and what you had to do differently.
Well, you're $60 million in the hole, right? Or $60 million bond.
The county's on the hook for $60 million. We've got a live race. We did make simulcasting successful. We were saving a little money up, but nowhere near what we needed for live racing. But so I put together a staff, and one of the things that's probably been an asset of mine, some may not agree, but I sometimes have a way of getting people to do things that they don't ordinarily think they could do or maybe want to do. but they believed in me. And when I tell them this is what we're going to do, and then you show them, and follow up, make sure if you tell somebody you're going to do something, do it, or make sure they know you're trying to do it.
And I want to jump in here. You were telling us beforehand you've got 3 words that you live by. Tell us about that, because I think that's why people believe in you.
Well, yeah, I've always had this. I call it this Timmons CTR. It's communication, trust, and respect. If you live your life that way, and I don't care if it's with your family, with your business partners, or your employees, coworkers, whatever it is, give people respect. I've always gone into meetings, and I've always had this feeling, this is me, that I'm not the smartest person in the room. There's something to learn from somebody. There's something to learn from everybody. And I always said God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you talk. And I tried to do that. It may not sound like it today because I pretty well dominated this conversation, but that's what I've always tried to do, is pick up on what is that strength that person has. Everybody's got a strength. It's just you got to figure out what that is and use it. Then how does that fit into our plan and what we're doing?
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and one thing, Tim, I think, Tom, you're one of those guys, and I've been in meetings with you, and you really never ever really get in an argument with anybody. You're a fact guy, is what I've seen. Is you absorb your information, and then you come back with your numbers and your facts, and so this is what can basically work. And I think that's where a lot of your respect came from, because you never winged it. You were always prepared. And also another thing, I think you really didn't have a lot of respect for people that do wing it and try to sell you stuff that maybe they shouldn't. But I like the way you always handled that in the past. Now, obviously, one of your biggest things you had to handle, $60 million in bond debt. Now you got to go back to the board and try to have them dig out of it. And it's a really interesting conversation, because now you got to go back tell us that story.
Well, yeah, you notice Paul always gets hung up on the money part.
Yes, he does. Yes, but, he wants to hear the story.
I know. Hey, well, we did. We were on the hook for $60 million, and as I said, 1993 we had a live race. We brought live racing back. State law at that time, you had to race a minimum of 90 days. 90 days of live racing, 9 races a day. We'll just do the figuring on the purses or something like that. Even $1,000 a race. I mean, you're well in excess of what, 1 million, maybe $1.2 million in purses. And we didn't have that kind of money saved up, because we were prohibited from paying any of our debts at that time. The creditors were held off at pay. But now bringing live racing back in, that was kind of a jump ball. Here we go, we're starting off. So we brought it back in 1993. We started racing, I'm going to say somewhere in the month of April, maybe first part of May. Got through May, got through June. All of a sudden, the first 40 days of racing had gone by, and our surpluses were being depleted. And it's like, well, what are we going to do? So I had this bright idea. I'd go to the Racing Gaming Commission and say, hey, can you waive our last 30 days of racing? We've got enough money to get through 60, but we'll shut it down in August. We just can't make it to October. And the commission, I got along with her. I was the head of the commission at that time, was Lorraine May, good friend of mine now. And she said, well, Tom, we'll deliberate on this. Then it took them all about 2 minutes, and they said, no, can't do it. It's state law. And we cannot amend state law. We can only enforce state law. That's what we do. We administer policy. I said, well, what do I do? And she said, well, if you can't race those last 30 days, you'll lose your license. Then show's over. So now I got to go back and tell everybody, hey, your paycheck's going to be good. Stick with me. I got an idea. I got a plan. Well, as I was saying to you earlier, do you remember what happened in July of 1993? Those of us that are old enough to remember, that's the year of the floods.
Been one of the biggest floods ever in the state of Iowa.
It was horrible. People in Des Moines, it got into the water system, as you know, the water treatment plant, and you couldn't have any running water. People couldn't take showers, couldn't drink. But Altoona, where the racetrack was located, was okay. They got their water supply from a different place. So people would come out, we'd open up the jocks room, they would take showers there. We would had a line to give people water. You know, they could fill up their jugs or whatever the case may be. And but we continued the live race through that month of July, and it was getting closer and closer to the end. But we had about, at that time, and I believe the tax is still the same today, but you had to take 2% of your wagers. So for every dollar that was bet, 2% had to go over and pay the state tax. And it was put into a fund. And it was just sitting there in the fund. You pay it at the end of the year at that time. So I kind of consulted with some other people, but I thought, well, I wonder if the governor could do anything about this. So Branstad was the governor at the time, and we went to him and asked him, what would you think of issuing an executive order of waiving the last 30 days of racing, and we'll take that $600,000 and give it to flood relief in the city of Des Moines or Polk County. And he didn't hesitate. He said, yep. And as I recall, I don't think he really was sure he could do it, had the power, but it was like everything was happening. It's kind of like COVID back in 1993.
Right.
People are just making decisions to help people that needed help. And that's what it was all about. So he issued that executive order, and the rest is history, as they say, because I honestly said no is not an option, but that was as close as I ever came to thinking that Prairie Meadows was going to close.
So at that point, you have the $600,000. You're at Prairie Meadows. You know that if you go another 30 days, you're going to burn through that $600,000. So either you could take that money and give it to a good cause, or burn it with the race at the time. Correct?
Exactly.
That's it in a nutshell.
Exactly. And the horse people worked with us as well. I want to give them credit because they knew their future did not just all end in that year. If they wanted to come back, and we had plans to, hey, what if we do get a casino someday? And then you'll be a part of that. And I worked with them very closely. And there was all these factors that played together, and it all came together right there.
Tom, you brought something up, and I think the achievers and business people out there right now is knowing your numbers, knowing your books, seeing the future. You're bringing the future to today, so you know where you're at. And what a great way of explaining that, Tom, because there's a lot of businesses, and I think we all are guilty of it, especially entrepreneurs out there that are going 100 miles an hour, and sometimes they're not seeing far enough out there financially. And to be able to
creative, they're not getting creative.
Right, getting creative, and that's what you had to do. But he got creative because he knew his true north, and that was his numbers and where he was going. And to steer that ship out of that wreck, you had to go to the governor. You had to look at a different alternative. But go ahead, and it gets more interesting. But go on into how you took your next step to actually get it turned around to become one of the most profitable casinos in the United States.
Yeah, the next step is not my idea. But I am proud of the fact, always will be, that the first horse race track in the United States to have slot machines was Prairie Meadows.
Yeah.
But there was a dog track out in Rhode Island. I want to say Providence because I went out and took a look at it. And Jim Rasmussen was with me as well at the time. And they had just put in some slot machines at their dog track. And we thought, that'll work here. I think that'll work here. And so it took a lot of working together with the other casinos, and because they had a need or a want, which at that time, if you may remember, boats. Mm-hmm. That's all it was. The only time you could gamble was when they were cruising, and they had bet limits. At the time, you had to have these little coupons, if you remember going on there. Yeah. And that was a real pain for them. Mm-hmm. And so they said, how do we get rid of those? And we said, well, here's what we got. And I'll never forget the legislator that got it through, and I'll give him credit this day, Tony Bisignato. Mm-hmm. He was on the Senate floor, and it had just passed the House, 51 votes. It takes 51 to get through the House. I got 51 on a Friday afternoon. There was rumors it was going to come back for a reconsideration vote, but it didn't happen. So it went to the Senate floor, and I remember going down there with Jim Rasmussen sitting in the balcony watching. There was a senator from Algona, Iowa. His name was Burl Preeb at the time. God rest his soul. But Burl and I got along great. I was friends with him for years. I think he even had racehorses. But he come up with the idea he was going to he had 16 different amendments he was going to put on this casino bill to allow to have the vote to see if we wanted it. And at any one of those amendments passed, that means it goes back to the House for passage. And the guy that the 51st vote at the time, don't remember who it was, but he said, if this comes back, I'm voting against it. So it would have went down. Here again, we're going right up to the 11th hour. So we sat in the balcony, and Tony Bisignano was successful in beating down all 16 of those amendments that Burl Preeb had on to try to put on that bill. And it was fascinating, but each one, Tony, they would say, I'll vote against it, and he had his votes there with him. Every time he'd look up and give us the thumbs up, you know, and that afternoon is when it passed, and then it went on to the governor for signing to allow, to do away with their loss limits, but also allow slot machines if the public voted on it. And so we took 2 votes in Polk County, opened up April 1. But before we got to that point,
What year was that?
It was 1995.
95,
95
okay.
April 1 was the first day of slot machines at Prairie
Right.
Meadows. But before we got to that point, we needed more money to buy machines and remodel. We didn't add on to the building at that time like it is today. We had to put it in the racetrack. So we took the first 2 floors, the basement level I call it, which goes out to the track level and the next level. And but we were just short about $40 million. Where do we get it? Well, there's only one source. When you owe 60 to somebody, what's the first thing you do? Go ask them for more, I guess. And we did. We went to them, said, what do you think? And that was a tough vote to get.
How did they respond when you owe that much money and
Like
you're asking
I
for that much
had
more?
been on smoking something all day. You know, it was like, wait a minute, you owe us $60 million. No, this will work. I got a good feeling this is going to work. I had no proof to show them at the time. You think about it, but it was just a gut. And so we put them in, as I said, opened it up April 1, 1995. Now we owe $100 million, by the way, going back to your numbers, Paul. But that $100 million was paid back to the county after the first 20 months of operation. We made over $5 million a month.
So you're a numbers guy, but you made the decision off of your gut.
Well,
Yeah, that's. I was going to have him explain that one. He went in with the numbers.
but what was I going to use as proof? I could use
Right.
Las Vegas, but they didn't have any horse tracks.
Right.
And our venture into gaming, so to speak, in Polk County at that point,
It's
the only
brand
thing
new.
we knew was horse racing, and how'd that go? You know, after 2 months, wait a minute, you know, what are we doing? So it was the only way it could work. And to this day, I mean, that's where, you know, laws have changed, and I think they've got to pay, I don't know what percent it is, 11%, I think, of their adjusted gross revenues now. So if they do $200 million, let's say do well above that, but that's over $20 million that goes to purses right there. So now do the math on
But
that.
you had a clear vision of what you wanted to create.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a great thing for our achiever is you got to have that clear vision. You've got to have the passion about it, and no is not an option, and that you keep getting creative, even if it does take borrowing more, if it does take getting more investment, because that's the challenge of an entrepreneur.
Yes, absolutely. And so you get the funding, and it's. Let me clarify. You paid it off in 20 months.
Yeah.
Paid off $100 million. Was that right?
$100 million was owed at that time to pay off the original bonds and the $40 million that was borrowed to buy the machines and remodel the inside. And but to this day, the county didn't sell the facility. The facility is still owned by Polk County,
Right.
and they still pay a handsome rent for that facility. So it wasn't a deal of where they paid them off and they have the title to the facility. That's not the case.
Okay.
It's county owned, it's still county owned to this day. The facility. It's run by the Prairie Meadows Board of Directors, though. They're the ones that have the gaming license, and they're also the nonprofit.
You cleaned up your debt,
Which is,
basically.
which there's only 2 of those in the state, by the way, and only 2 in the nation, where the nonprofit actually runs the facility.
Yeah, and actually, I did business out in West Virginia with Mountaineer Racetrack Casino, and they soon after Prairie Meadows opened, they opened and did the exact same thing in Wheeling, West Virginia, and I had been doing business, and Ted Arnault, I believe, was the the manager out there, general manager, did a wonderful job out there and opened, I believe, in 96, 97 time right after that, and did a wonderful job too. But I will tell you, all the racetracks I have been at, that's one of the nicest racetracks in the United States. So if you haven't been to Prairie Meadows Racetrack Casino, if you like horses or you like to gamble, it's a great place to go.
Yeah, Mountaineer Park.
Yeah, that's right, Mountaineer. But
we talk about our health, family, and business. I'd love to hear how you balanced your personal life through all of this stress as well, because this had to bring stress to your life, and it had to bring stress to your family. And with our achiever and our audience, that's a day-to-day life as well.
Yeah, and you have to get priorities. I'm not saying I was perfect at it. My focus, about all of my energies, went into Prairie Meadows. That was my kid. I love my kids, but after 11 years of being at Prairie Meadows, my family needed some attention, and so I decided to leave and tried to give that. And you hear that a lot when people leave. They say, I want to spend more time with the family. I don't know if that's true in 90% of the cases, but it wasn't mine. Mm-hmm. And I took a year to sit on the sidelines. Didn't do much in that year other than take care of some things that probably should have been taken care of before. But leave it at that. But it was, yeah, I don't know if I'm the good one to ask about that, but I do know that you've got to have a balance. I didn't. There again, we're not all
But ultimately,
perfect.
you made the toughest decision to do that.
I did. I'm not looking for any pat on the back or thank you, but I don't think they would be there today if just a couple of stories I told you.
Yeah.
If we hadn't had some guts maybe, or fortitude to take on the establishment or take on whatever needed to be done at that time, and especially with the forces against you, as they were back then. But you can't unring a bell.
Yeah.
I've learned that a long time ago. And so the only thing you can do is look ahead. Satchel Paige said, "Don't look back. Somebody might be gaining on you," and that's what I've always tried to do is just look forward.
Well, Tom, and then you went on to be successful not only with Prairie Meadows, but you went on to be successful with Lakeside Casino, and then Wild Rose Casino, which is a great casino here in the state of Iowa. You hooked up with one of the biggest entrepreneurs in the state of Iowa, Gary Kirk, and I know you guys not only became great business partners, but you became great friends over the years. And could you talk a little bit about the experience with Wild Rose Casino?
First day I was called in, Gary was having some issues with some management, and the two he owned at the time was Emmitsburg, and he just opened basically. He'd opened them in May, and I went there in August that same year. And he was having some issues with them. Some people maybe weren't paying attention to the right things. I don't know. But he said, I want you to come in and train some people for me and work with me. And I said, well, I just got a couple questions. And he said, what? And I said, well, who do I answer to? He says, well, you answer to me. And I said, oh, okay. And he says, and if you don't like what I say, or he said, well, wait a minute. He says, no, I want you to answer to Dr. Mike Richards. That was his partner at the time. And I said, okay. So I answered to Dr. Mike. And he says, yeah, but if you don't like what he says, you call me. I said, fair enough. And I said, okay, so when do I start? And he said, well, can you go up there this afternoon? And he wanted me to go to Emmitsburg and straighten some things out. And I said, how about tomorrow morning? I said, I got to go home and pack a little bit. And he says, okay. And I stood up, shook his hand. And we shook hands. And that's all we ever had for 16 years.
Wow.
No contract, nothing. It was just the old Iowa contract. We shook hands.
Your words, your bond.
Yeah. And I don't think you'll find anybody else in the state of Iowa or anywhere that runs casinos without something, But that's the type of person Gary is. He tells you, and that's the way it was. And then, I had to remind him I would, and trust me, he'd remind me when I didn't do something too. But because we just had that communication between ourselves. I always said, guy in my position or gal, you've got to be willing to tell people what they need to hear, not what they want to hear.
Yes.
And it's not always easy, but that's what you can't be in fear of, And so when you take a position and you don't own the business, but you're expected to run it, then you've got to run it as if you own it.
Yes.
But you got to be willing to tell that person above you the truth. So.
Well, I can tell you, Tom, what a great career you've had, and a great Iowan I consider. And I know now that you've been retired for a few months, you got a great trip with your wife going to Hawaii for the first time. I think that's amazing, and I think you're a perfect example of it's the guy behind the scenes that can make a lot of difference. And you have been that achiever and done great, and I appreciate you coming today. And I've learned a lot here, Monte. I think that we've got the whole story and the truth today with Prairie Meadows. Nobody really knows. It's always kind of foggy, but I knew Tom was the inside guy, and getting people to do and believe in, they may not think they can do it, but that leadership that you had talked about earlier about getting people to do things they may not want to or think they can do, and then they do it anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a few takeaways, Tom, that I had from you. I love your CTR. I do love communication, trust, and respect, because people need to believe in you. And if you don't do it, there's lack of respect and lack of trust. No is not an option. Always look forward, and you need to hear the things that need to be heard, and not just what you want to hear. And I think that's powerful, that people get lost there sometimes. And
yes.
Subordinates get lost there because they want to please their boss. They want to please the manager instead of saying what is really needing to occur.
Yes.
And achievers have to be respectful and build that trust so you can have those conversations.
Yeah.
So
it's a balance.
Absolutely.
It's a balance. I always said, last thought I'll leave you with, because I know you got to wrap this up, but some people ask me, how did you run Prairie Meadows, or how does one try to run Prairie Meadows? And I'm not speaking for anyone that's run it since I've left or currently running it. But I always said the trick to running Prairie Meadows is letting others think they do.
Yeah.
Because you've got so many bosses out there. The City Council of Altoona, Polk County Board of Supervisors, the Iowa Racing Gaming Commission, the Board of Directors of Prairie Meadows. All these entities in and of themselves think that that's their track, that's their facility. And so when you go to meet with them, because you need all of them for something, and it's kind of a blend that you have to play. It's a maybe somewhat of a politician, but also that fine line you were just referring to, Monte. So that's what I always learned from there when I was out there.
And it is, I think that, people want to, obviously with that many fingers in the pot, everybody wants to feel valued. And that's part of it. And you did a wonderful job in doing that. But, we have a, question, what do you want to see your legacy? What would you like to see you to be known for?
I saw that was one of your questions, and you've had to ask that of other people. And I've never really thought about it or worried too much about it, but I have thought about it since you said something to me. And I think it was kind of what I wrote to Gary my last day of work, that I said, I hope you find what I did and what was done is that it's better today than when I started.
Yeah.
And whether I was on a school board for 9 years, chairman of it for 4, my old alma mater, PCM. And by the way, running a school board is different than running a business.
Yes.
I can have my back on that. But no, that's what I've always tried to do, whether it was a school board or whatever. Try to make sure that things, you left them better than you found them. And I think most places I've been probably say that.
That's a great legacy.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
Absolutely. Tom, thank you much for joining us today. Very much, really appreciate the story. Achievers, hope you learned a lot and keep growing, keep breaking through your next ceiling. And thank you again for your great insights.
And remember, May 5th and 6th, Berkshire Hathaway, we're going to have a meetup, wicmediapod@gmail.com. If you send a email to us, we'll tell you a location where our meetup is, and we'll have more information coming out.
Very good. Have a great day. Thank you.